Well, this is an absolutely huge week. We're going to be getting a verdict in the Donald Trump criminal trial as I'm smacking my mic in Manhattan. And that means that Donald Trump, his children had to travel down to the courthouse and scream at the press or speak to the press about the situation facing their father. And I have to say, they're headed into what has long been their nightmare, which is getting a verdict on this case. They tried to delay it, and now is the time that they're going to learn how this is going to end. I don't think they're particularly hopeful. We don't know how it's going to end, but I think more likely than not, it won't go the way of their father. And so you have Donald Trump Jr. here, frantic as always, super stressed about the situation that he and his father are facing, and he had this to say.
This is a sham, it's insane, and it needs to stop, because if you think for 1 second that this ends with Donald Trump, you have not been watching what's going on in the Democrat Party in the last few years. They want power at any and all costs. Your rights be damned. That can't stand. That can't happen. This sham prosecution, this insanity, this abomination has to stop now.
Goodness gracious. Now, despite the passion that he's exuding, what he's saying is just completely ridiculous. And it's interesting. One of the things that crossed my mind was him saying they'll try to get power by any means necessary when it's his father who's currently being prosecuted for, particularly in two other cases, for trying to illegally overturn an election because he didn't want to let go of power. So that's a little bit of projection there. But also, I'm so sick of, before playing this next clip, this talking point about it's not going to end with Trump. What do you mean? Yes, if Trump is found guilty here, the crime he's accused, that whole process will be over, okay? They're not going to go after Don Jr. for violating campaign finance law and then trying to cover that up with the falsification of business records relating to a hush money payment. Unless he did that, same thing with these other cases. Unless you still classify documents, they're not going to do to you what they're doing to Trump. And obviously, he doesn't mean that specifically. He means they're going to persecute, but they're yet to bring forward evidence that actually prove this is persecution. And in so many of these cases, the evidence is so overwhelming that Trump maybe just violated the law. Maybe that's what's going on, and then legal accountability is taking place, as I've now said so many times. Here's more from Don Jr.
Right? Because he's been gagged. The President of the United States is not allowed to exercise his First Amendment rights in New York City in this day and age.
Yeah, and another tired talking point, it's not a violation of the First Amendment to have a gag order put in place and enforced. They weren't screaming about gag orders until now, and the millions of other people who've been subjected to them. And it's important to protect the legitimacy of the constitutional process that we have in place for these trials, to sometimes make sure people aren't going after witnesses, going after the family of judges. That the process has to be protected too. And so you have to balance the freedom of speech people have with the fact that they're a criminal defendant. And that's what we've seen for a long time. And now they have an issue with it when Trump is subjected to the very same process. Then I do want to get to Eric Trump as well and Laura Trump, but I want to say that we'll get into a pretty huge day in court where Todd Blanche, Trump's attorney, he delivered the defense or the defense's closing statement, and it didn't go well. The judge snapped at him and was upset with him. So we'll get to that with our legal expert, Aaron Parnas, and talk about the prosecution's closing statement so far as well. But first, here's more from this press conference.
I'm just proud of the toughest person I've ever met in my entire life for having the backbone and fortitude to go through this whole mess, as uncomfortable as it's been. And I'm proud to have stood there every single second by his side in that freezing cold courtroom against unthinkable odds and a corrupt judge and people making a lot of money and this political witch hunt. He's an inspiration to me every single day, and he'll be vindicated. Thank you very much.
I'm just so inspired. It really chokes me up. I'm inspired that my dad, when his wife had recently had a child, that he had the courage, that he was brave, that he had the backbone to say, wife be damned, newborn be damned, I'm going to go have an affair with a porn star. I wish I had that courage as my wife stands behind me. I wish I could cheat on her like he cheated on Melania. And then I'm so proud of the fact that he went on to try to cover that up in ways that could have been defrauding the American people. Obviously, the affair is not the criminal part, but it is the story at the core of all of this that he was trying to cover up with the falsification of business records. So a very strange performance there from Eric Trump. Then taking a break from the press conference and getting to the Democratic side of things, the Biden campaign showed up, and a lot of people were criticizing, including the children at different parts of the press conference, the fact that the Biden campaign was there and saying that members of the Biden campaign shouldn't be there because that's proving that this is some political hit job. But I should say, the Biden campaign member who was there responded perfectly to that question.
Why did the Biden campaign decide to come here today?
Because you all are here. We've been incessantly covering this day in and day out, and we want to remind the American people ahead of the next debate, of the first debate on June 27th, of the unique, persistent, and growing threat that Donald Trump poses to the American people and to our democracy. So since you all are here, we're here communicating that message as we will do day in, day out until the debate in Atlanta.
I'm so pleased with the answer there because you are all here, referring to the media. And it's so true. Trump's been getting this huge megaphone because all the press is covering the trial so that he can go out and speak to all of them, and his surrogates can speak to all of them, despite them saying that the First Amendment has been destroyed. And Biden hasn't had his surrogates there speaking to the press. I love that they showed up today. It's not proof that Biden's involving himself. It's proof that Trump got himself into some legal trouble, and Biden's obviously going to point that out because that's a part of the character of Trump now and something the American people should consider. And then here's Laura Trump, who had this to say.
If this is successful, this is Banana Republic type stuff. And if they can profit off it on the other side, so can we. DonaldJTrump.com. If you want to contribute to help Donald Trump become the 47th president of the United States.
So obviously a mess there and so many untruths, but I do want to dive into what took place at the criminal trial today. I want to bring in our legal expert, Aaron Parnas, to help us do so. Huge day today, closing statements being delivered. We already have the defense's closing statement. Now we'll get to the prosecutions, but break down sort of what's notable so far in the closing statements news.
Yeah, so the big thing, so today Todd Blanche gave the closing arguments on behalf of defense counsel on behalf of Donald Trump. And it's weird in New York, unlike in other places, defense goes first, then the prosecutors. So defense went up, gave a closing argument for about 2.5 hours. And the key takeaway there was really twofold. Number one, Todd Blanche really confused the jury. If you really read his closing arguments, he was really in the weeds of the catch and kill schemes with Karen McDougal and a number of other issues that aren't too relevant to his defense. He should have really harped on Michael Cohen and really attacked Cohen, but he kind of didn't do that as well as he should have. That was number one. And then number two, the really big kind of moment was at the end of Todd Blanche's closing arguments, he essentially told the jury to be mindful that their verdict could send Donald Trump to prison. And that is completely inappropriate and unacceptable in a criminal courtroom. And Judge Mershon quickly admonished him, sustained a prosecutor's objection, and called Blanche's arguments highly inappropriate and outrageous, especially given the fact that Blanche was a former federal prosecutor. And he should have known that he can't talk to the jury about punishment. The jury's responsibility is finding guilt or innocence, while the judge's responsibility is to punish Trump if he is convicted. So it is inappropriate for any attorney, prosecutors or defense attorneys, to bring up a possible punishment in their closing arguments.
Yeah, and the specific quote being, that statement was outrageous, like you said, also calling it highly inappropriate. It does seem a little bit desperate there from Todd Blanche having to pull that out. And you know, he had to know that that was not appropriate, but he chose to do it anyways. And then do we have any knowledge yet of the prosecution strategy, what they've been delivering, or will that come at the end of their closing statement?
Yeah, so prosecutors actually kind of started off their closing argument this afternoon with a really kind of bow on their case. They started, if you remember, they started their opening statement with a clear statement. This is a case about a criminal conspiracy. They started their closing arguments with that same statement, that same theme, that this is a case about a criminal conspiracy, a conspiracy to undermine the results of the 2016 election. They essentially took most of the first part of their closing arguments to rebut a number of highly irrelevant facts that were elicited during Todd Blanche's closing argument. Prosecutors really harped on the fact that Michael Cohen has been through the ringer, has already had multiple felony convictions, has served several years in prison, has had impacts to his business and legal career, and that they didn't necessarily choose him as a witness. This is the witness that Donald Trump, in their closing arguments, they said, chose to be his fixer. If prosecutors obviously had a choice at a witness, they wouldn't choose someone who had multiple felony convictions and was a previously convicted liar. So they really harped on that. They really harped on the fact that Michael Cohen was really the link in a number of these falsified business records, and how Donald Trump had the requisite intent to falsify the business records. So they're really walking through methodically through their case. Now, prosecutors expect to take up to 4.5 hours for their closing arguments, so we still have a bit of a ways to go. But in any event, it's looking much better for prosecutors than it is for defense attorneys.
Wow. And with that being said, when that wraps up, is it completely unknown how long the jury is going to take, because they could deliberate however long?
Yeah, we don't know. Jurors can take as long as they want. And in a case like this, it's really not common given how long, this case has lasted about 6 weeks. It's not uncommon to see a jury in a regular case take multiple days to deliberate, ask several questions, go through the evidence. And given that this has a former president involved, you could even see it take longer. But the one thing I would caution, jurors have been sitting on this case for 6 weeks now. The last thing they want is to go home for another weekend, having to come back on Monday morning and deliberate. So if I had to guess, we will have a resolution by the end of this week, whether it's a unanimous verdict or if it's a hung jury, one or the other. But I'm pretty sure we'll get word one way or the other by the end of Friday.
Big stuff. Aaron, where can people find you?
On all my social platforms, just at Aaron Parnas.